Hello and welcome back to Normal Guy Games. Please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, everybody. I'm sure that you can see this egregious mess behind me on the painting table. This is the result of me prepping for Leviathan. Now, you can see here, if we go past my head, I have actually assembled all of the Tyranids from Leviathan. But I am not here to paint Leviathan. Why? Why am I not painting Leviathan? Well, everybody's doing that millionth unboxing of Leviathan. Let me show you some sprues. Well, I'm going to avoid that this time. This time, I'm going to show you how to paint a Death Guard slap chop style. Now, this particular Death Guard came from the Space Marine Heroes, I believe it was the third set, the original Death Guard, not the newest ones. So anyway, let's get to it, and I'll show you how I did it. So as we know, the first thing you do when you start a new slap chop project is you push the highlights, right? You put that white on there. Well, what I did is I wanted this guy, even though he's Death Guard, I wanted the colors to be kind of bright and I wanted them to stand out quite a bit. So before I started slapping down the Creed camo, I dry brushed white over top of the model on the highest areas. And this is part of the zenithal process that I use when I'm doing slap chop. And in this particular instance, I did airbrush, but you don't have to airbrush. You can use any dry brushing technique you want. It just, for me, it's easier if I'm doing airbrushing already. I might as well just airbrush the models that I'm getting ready to slap chop. So there we are. Now for this scheme, I am going for like a classic green armor type look, which is what most people do. I'm going to be using mostly contrast paints with a couple of regular paints mixed in there as well. I want the armor to look kind of faded out, but I also want it to look a little bit mottled and kind of worn down. So I am letting the paint pool everywhere. And that's fine for me because I want the armor to look weird and strange and, you know, I don't want it to look like brand new armor, right? So this is me going on to the tentacles. The tentacles, and the little spike here, whatever the heck that thing is, I am using Volupus Pink and Guilliman Flesh. And I'm using that to wet blend, so the Guilliman Flesh is at the top and the Volupus Pink is at the bottom, and the places where it's emerging from the armor. Now this is Skeleton Horde, and I'm using that for the horn, and I'm using it. I used it on the teeth of a couple of the little Nurgling guys there. Now the Nurglings are getting Plaguebearer Flesh. This is just straight up Plaguebearer Flesh. It's really good for sickly skin colors. An excellent choice, excellent paint. It shows up really well when you slap chop. And the Plaguebearer Flesh, it works out pretty well for the basing also. I used it for the floor of the base, and then I used a couple of other colors to sort of, you know, differentiate between the two. Now I wanted this to look nasty, of course, because it's Death Guard. For the little strange little parasite worms, whatever the hell these things are, I used Eand and yellow to give them kind of a sickly yellow orange look to them. And I also put a couple of splotches of green and or brown on a few places as well, just to kind of break up the monotony a little bit. And I also used this for the little toothy, I don't know what they are. Are they anuses? Are they little creatures? I mean, who knows? They could be other worms. I don't know. Anyway, so for the staff, I used Gargax Sewer, appropriately, of course. And the shaft of the staff, I used Ironbreaker. Now, the Gargax Sewer, I did use on the tabard as well because it's kind of a duty brown And I figured, you know what? We've already got kind of a pinky purplish on the tendrils. Why not just go duty brown? And I painted that in the mouths of the worms as well, because pretty much, I mean, Plague Marines, Death Guard, Nurgle, they're all fairly disgusting. So there we are. I also used this for the leather of the pouch that his gun is holstered in as well. And this was just to kind of keep the theme and keep everything sort of aligned color-wise. Now, as you can see, this is me using Lead Belcher. This is one of the few paints that I use that is not a contrast paint. And the reason why is I kind of wanted it to be somewhat faithful to the original art. And I felt like a metal staff would look good against the green of his armor. And in the end, it turned out looking pretty good after the washing stage. So, moving on, the next thing I did was the bronze, or well, the other metallics, and I used a bronzish kind of color. It's Rune Lord Brass, or I'm sorry, I believe it's Rune Lord Brass. Give me just a moment here. It is indeed Rune Lord Brass. So that is the color that I used for all of the brassy details that you see here. The staff, the trim of his armor, the and everything else that was like the symbols for Nurgle on his chest and on his arm as well. I used Rune Lord Brass for that, and a couple of other little accoutrements here and there. Ended up getting brass as well. So this color looks good. I do wish that I had a more bronzy kind of a color that I could have used over top of this instead of the brass, but I unfortunately did not have a bronze on me. So this is the closest I could come. And in the end, once you wash it, it still looks good. And as you can see here, I did do a couple of little here and there details on the backpack as well. The fan shroud, the little accoutrements and details there, and the metal banding that goes across the bottom. I have to say the symbol on his chest piece was probably the hardest piece to paint because it was so small. I mean, it still ended up looking pretty good. I did make a couple of mistakes here and there, but I went back afterward and we fixed those up. And as you can see here, the trim on his shoulder pad also turned out pretty good with that. The Rune Lord Brass did end up looking okay against the green. It still kind of broke things up. I don't feel like the next best thing I had was Retributor armor, and I really didn't feel like Retributor armor would be appropriate for Death Guard. So I ended up just going ahead and rolling with the Rune Lord Brass. Now I did paint his eye over in Rune Lord Brass as well, but I actually went back and painted the lens red, and we'll do that a little. I'll show you that a little bit later. But the bronze part, honestly, it's a lot easier than you might think, and I guess that could be just because of how many Thousand Suns I painted and all of that gold trim. In comparison, the brass trim here is pretty much nothing. It was super simple. So as you can see, at least for these symbols, I am being super duper careful, and I am bracing my hand here so I can paint these small details without my hand shaking or moving out of place, because I do have a problem with that. Now, pardon me, the knife also got the lead belcher as well. Now, this is an oil wash, and I'm not going to go over the nuances of mixing an oil wash and making sure your oil wash is good, because there are much better painters that have done a much better job. Marco from Marco, not just Mecha, he pretty much does the best oil painting tutorial. He did a grimdark version of it was a Adeptus Mechanicus unit. I can't remember his name. It was a character, a named unit. But anyway, so Marco does a much better job than I would do explaining how to make an oil wash. I mean, if you guys want, I can explain my process of making an oil wash, I suppose. Let me know in the comments if anybody wants me to do that. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm going back over. As you can see, I've already taken the oil wash off of the topmost areas. And I'm just going back over on the edges of this stuff with that same Runelord brass on the topmost edges. And this is only to add a little bit of shine back on. Now, what I've got here, I actually have the Monument Hobbies green from the Vince Venturella set. That's the dark yellow green. It is very close to Death World green, and it is much more friendly going onto the model than Death World green. And so I decided to use that instead of Death World green to do the edges of the armor, to do the damage, and especially the places where the tendrils and everything else are bursting out of the armor. I used that dark yellow green as a starter to try and sort of mimic damage to the armor, because if you bend metal, it does change the color of the metal. It makes things kind of lighter because you're kind of straining the metal. And I did a little bit of modeling here and there to make the armor look kind of old and worn and dirty and just chipped and whatnot. And I used that dark yellow green to do the edge highlights as well. Now, I am going to go back over these edge highlights again with a lighter color. And what I did is I mixed that green in with a yellow. And the yellow that I used was a Citadel paint. I used the Uriel yellow. And I mixed that into that dark yellow green. And I painted that on the edges of the armor. And as you can see, I also used that on the pustules that are on the tendrils that are poking out of his stomach. Now, I did mix a little more of that yellow into a little bit more of that dark yellow green to make it lighter yet again. And what I did with that, as you can see, is I kind of did like a tapping on the edges of the armor. So instead of just getting an edge highlight to make it look nice, what I did is I took that lighter color, it's that green mixed with a little more yellow, and made it I just kind of tapped on the edges of the armor to try and get it to look like a little bit more damage. And I used that brighter color around the openings of the armor, as you can see where all of the tendrils and the nasty stuff is poking out. Now, this is me again going back over those areas where I hit that dark yellow green and just putting a couple of dots here and there of that bright color. Now, this is almost entirely yellow, and I just put that on the very tops of the pustules that are on the tendrils. Now here, the first thing I tried to use lead belcher to make to put a couple of highlights to make the metal look worn. I ended up just doing a lighter color, a shining silver. Anyway, as you can see, this is the final product. The last thing I did was I painted the base black. Honestly, I kind of sort of wanted to paint it kind of a darker green, but I ended up just going with that black instead, which is my usual color. I don't know. I may go back and I may use a green instead, but I'm just not entirely sure. Because usually, as you've seen on most of my models, most of them do get that black instead of a different color, and that's just kind of personal preference more than anything. And I am putting two kind of thickish coats around the edge there, and that's just something I do as well, because the base, the edge of the base, is kind of what gets knocked around the most on a lot of these models. So now that we have gotten all of that done, I'm going to put this arm on. Now I kind of originally forgot how it was positioned, and I tried to put it on too high, as you can see here. I eventually figured myself out and got it on properly. But that's it. I mean, that's what it looks like afterward. I think, honestly, for a slap chop job, for a quick, couple of hours of work, it really is not that bad. I think it ended up really good, especially the panels there. But as you can see, I'm pointing out the legs. I forgot to do the suit in between the little black undersuit that goes between the armor and the marine that's underneath there. And what I used was a little bit of that black watered down, so some of the green would still shine through. So I don't have to go back and edge highlight that in that little tiny space. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.